Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar titled Achieving Data Integrity in the Cloud. My name is Drexel Rotroff and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Blue Mountain Quality Resources. And I'm so excited to see so many people join us for today's webinar. We have people from all across the country as well as some international in attendance, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we hope it's beneficial for you. I'm going to cover a few logistical items before I introduce our presenter today. We are really hoping to make this webinar very interactive, and we want to encourage feedback and questions and really a discussion around the topic. So there are two ways you can participate and interact with us. The first, which we recommend, is by raising your hand. You can see the screenshot of how to do that in the slide. We will then go ahead and unmute your phone, and you'll be able to ask your question over the line live. And then the second option is you can also type a question and send it to us through the questions panel. We're going to try to answer questions throughout, or we'll certainly leave some time at the end for questions. So with that said, I want to introduce today's presenter. Today's presentation is presented by Jenny Lee, who is the Business Analyst Manager here at Blue Mountain Quality Resources. Jenny has been here about 3 years. And she has about 10 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry. So we're really happy to have Jenny here and have her presenting today's webinar.
All right, thank you, Drexel, and welcome everybody. So just some housekeeping. Today's agenda, we're going to discuss some recent data integrity trends and findings, some data integrity draft guidance overview notes, and then we're going to go into data integrity in the cloud and what you can look for if you're looking to purchase a GMP software solution. And we're going to discuss some of the guidance examples and how they can relate to hosted solutions. The objectives for today, I would like for you to become familiar with the FDA's draft data integrity guidance, to be able to understand how this pertains to hosted GMP software, and to understand how the use of hosted software can increase data integrity in your organization. So I want to start off by talking about some regulatory trends, and this came from Food and Drug Law Institute, or FDLI, and they're looking at the number of data integrity related findings, and they go back to 2008. This is specifically in warning letters. So keep in mind there may be some activity that the FDA observes when they go on site, and they would issue a 483. This would be the next step up, and it would be a little bit more severe in the form of a warning letter. And these are warning letters that very specifically cited data integrity violations. If you can see in 2008 through roughly 2013, it was pretty steady. Once you get into 2014, you can see that it really jumps up. And you can see that this really shows that it's one of the key focuses of the FDA when they go to do an inspection. They're looking for data integrity related issues as a representation of the compliance health of an organization. Here's a different way to look at some of the numbers that FDLI has presented, and you can see starting in 2013, they're judging the percent of data integrity findings looking at the United States. Outside the United States is OUS, and then total percent of warning letters citing data integrity. So if you look, you can tell that 2013, 2014, there's not too much going on in the United States, but even though we hear a lot about external data integrity findings being prevalent, they're really looking at that inside the United States too as a key factor when they go to do their audit. So, and the trends are increasing, so they're really targeting this when they go there. So this is a quote from Thomas Cosgrove. He was a director in one of the FDA offices, and he said that data integrity really sounds off alarm bells for us. If you see data integrity on the surface, there is likely a lot going on underneath. So this is kind of what I was talking about before, that they're really looking for this. If they see that you're really compliant within data integrity, they're likely not going to find any serious systemic issues with how you're doing things. And I put in a little picture of this iceberg there because He was saying if you see it on the surface, it really is a lot going on more than that. And you'll see this if you look at the FDA's website or if you look at any of their presentations. They always use the iceberg graphic to kind of describe their thoughts and opinions on how data integrity relates to the rest of the organization. Now I want to get into some recent findings, and these are some interesting warning letters. They're right on the FDA's website. You can feel free to browse through them as you please, but I wanted to bring some of the more dramatic data integrity violations that I had found. This one's from May 2018. It's pretty recent, and this is paraphrased, but it says that they were cited for failure to exercise sufficient controls over computerized systems to prevent unauthorized access or changes to data, and failure to have adequate controls to prevent omission of data. And they were saying that the investigator found that audit trails in your standalone instruments were not enabled. So the instruments had audit trails, but somebody had turned them off. And then it gets into they also did not have other mechanisms for recording and monitoring any changes to data generated on these instruments. So it's not a full picture of what's going on. Your firm backed up electronic data from these instruments to a portable drive. However, the drive was not password protected, and it was stored in an unlocked drawer in an unlocked office. So there's no level of permissions to the data that they have. Then they go on to say that the investigator found that operators had full citizen permissions, including the ability to modify and delete files. So again, the deleting of data is not very good in terms of what the FDA thinks. There's an additional finding in there. They have found that there was a failure to record activities at the time they are performed. For example, our investigator discovered blank batch production records that were pre-signed by the operators. Not only that, but they were using pencil as well. So it's kind of hard to sign for data that you haven't even collected yet. So the signature tied to that is basically not attributable to the work. Another finding, this is continued from there. So after they go through and list all of their findings, they have a section and it's called Data Integrity Remediation, and they go through what they're looking for that company to do to be able to correct their data integrity deficiencies. And they say that among many other things that aren't listed here, a comprehensive investigation into the extent of the inaccuracies in the data records and reporting. So they really want them to get into why did this happen, a retrospective evaluation of the nature of the testing, manufacturing, and other data integrity deficiencies, a risk assessment of everything that they had, how does it impact the quality of the drugs? How can you prove that even though your data is basically meaningless, that the patients that are using whatever product or drug that you've made, they are still safe? So they take it very seriously. And then a management strategy for your firm that includes the details of your global corrective action. So it's not just targeted to specific items that they found or the specific building or site of your company that this was found at. And then they're also looking into, they want them to indicate whether individuals responsible for data integrity lapses remain able to influence CGMP-related or drug application data at your firm. So they, in other words, are looking to make sure that you have fired the individuals that should have prevented these issues from happening. Another finding, this is a different company, this is from March of 2017, and the FDA has said that your firm failed to exercise appropriate controls over computer or related systems to ensure that only authorized personnel institute changes in master production and control records or other records. And you can see the reference to 21 CFR 211, and we're going to get into why that's important a little bit later. For example, during the inspection of sterile manufacturing and QC microbiology areas, the investigators found that there was a deletion of at least 6 tests in the audit trail for 2 instruments that were used in testing. And then they also found that all users could delete or modify files, so nothing was protected from change. Another one, April 2017, different company. They found a failure to control the issuance, revision, superseding, and withdrawal of all documents by maintaining revision histories. The investigators were there, and they found that observed, torn, partially complete QA-signed calibration records were in the trash can. They also observed QA staff shredding documents without recording their identity or the reason for shredding the documents. So when they got there, they were suspicious. What are you trying to hide? What are you trying to recreate information so that it passes or whatnot? And again, they get into the data integrity remediation section of that warning letter, where they're looking for that comprehensive investigation, the full risk assessment, and the management strategy for the firm that includes the details of the global corrective action. To go back to that one, the FDA was incredibly concerned by this because the group and department that is supposed to be responsible for helping to ensure data integrity in the organization, the quality assurance organization, wasn't even following the right rules for handling data. So that if they're not doing it right, we're basically assuming that nobody was doing it right. So again, the tip of the iceberg and then everything underneath it. So now I want to get into the draft guidance a little bit and some background on it, and then we'll go into some details about the questions that were presented in it. Inside the guidance, it talks about that it outlines the FDA's current thinking regarding the narrow scope and application of Part 11, pending FDA's reexamination of Part 11 as it applies to all FDA-regulated products. Again, it was published in April 2016. It is still in draft format 2 years later, and I've seen nothing signaling that it's going to be approved anytime soon. It contains non-binding recommendations, and it really is meant to clarify the importance of data integrity to CGMP. It's written in a Q&A format. There's 18 questions in total, which makes it really easy to understand what message the FDA is trying to share with the people that it's meant for, the regulated pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device companies. So what is data integrity? Now that we've looked at some findings, the FDA defines data integrity in that draft guidance. They use the acronym ALCOA, which you've probably all heard of before. And ALCOA stands for attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and sometimes you'll see enduring and retrievable. And that's typically meant for electronic records. So getting into attributable, that means who performed the action and when was the action performed. So you have to be able to tell, just like on paper or electronic, the same thing, who did it and when they did it, and it has to be tied to each specific entry that was made. Legible, data must be permanent and readable. So no crayons, no gel pens, no cursive. It really needs to be clear so that you can understand what the meaning was when it was written. Contemporaneous, recording at the exact time of the entry. You wouldn't want to take medicine that was made by somebody when they signed their information or entered their data that they think they remembered what they did 2 days ago. No, you need to record your entries at the time the activities were performed. You can't rely on memory for anything. Original, so it needs to be the original, or they get into a definition of what is a true copy of the information. You can't photocopy something or transcribe something on the back from the back of your rubber glove or on the back of a napkin or a kin wipe or something. It has to be the original. If you have a batch record, you need to record the information directly into your batch record. And then finally, the A for accurate. Accurate means that there's no errors or editing without appropriate comments or amendments. So if you changed, maybe you took a reading off of a scale that said 4.6 kgs, and then you crossed it off and wrote 5.2 kgs, you can't really do that without an explanation. So you need to say, inadvertently looked at the wrong number, inadvertently wrote the wrong number, to explain that you weren't trying to change the data so that you could basically pass or test into compliance. Then if you get into enduring and retrievable, especially with electronic records, you want to make sure that it's something that you can access for the life of the retention policy, and that it will still be something that you can read. So are electronic systems more compliant than paper systems? Let's get into that a little bit more. Many of the warning letter violations reference automated systems, so simply moving away from a paper system is not going to move you into compliance. There's a lot that you have to keep in mind. You would need a system that has audit trails that can't be tampered with and are easily viewable. So you can see the one example that I presented with earlier. There was an audit trail and they turned it off. So if you can find a system that prevents you from turning off the audit trail, that would be ideal. A system that allows for unique user logins. So you don't want to have to share one login with 5 employees. You want to be able to have logins that are attributable to each person. You need something that records the date, time, and meeting with signatures. And again, you want that to show up in the audit trail that's easily viewable. You want something that restricts the ability to fully delete records. So pushing a delete button, you would want to make sure that your data doesn't actually go away. Maybe it's a soft delete, but if you can wipe away your data, that's probably not a good thing. Then you want something that allows for different security levels. Again, some of the warning letters that I had discussed said that everybody had the same access. You probably don't want an end user to have administrative rights in the system. You need to be able to segregate that easily and then be able to demonstrate who has what access. Some additional features you can look for would include maybe smart fields or pick lists to reduce data recording errors. That's something that you wouldn't be able to get from paper. A system with automated workflows to ensure that steps are not missed. How many times have you gone to review a final batch record and there were missing signatures? Well, an automated system with workflows would prevent that from happening. You wouldn't be able to close that workflow out or move it forward with blank information. And then, again, allowing for making fields required would help to pause that workflow until all the required information is recorded by the right person at the right time. So a hosted solution is something, so data integrity in the cloud. What does that mean? Using a hosted solution is another way to talk about that. Again, it's also called software as a service, cloud computing, and it's a software licensing and delivery model in which software is licensed on a subscription basis and is centrally hosted. That is Wikipedia's definition. You may ask, is the FDA okay with cloud? Well, the guidance includes cloud infrastructure in their definition of a computer or related systems definition. And what they say is a computer or related systems can refer to computer hardware, software, peripheral devices, networks, cloud infrastructure, operators, and associated documents. So they acknowledge that a lot of customer or people are using the cloud and they are okay with it as long as it meets all of the regulations. Some additional indications on their stance of using software as a service or the cloud. So this comes from the use of electronic records and electronic signatures in clinical investigations under 21 CFR Part 11, questions and answers, guidance for industry. The question in here, does FDA consider it acceptable for data to be distributed across a cloud computing services hardware at several different geographic locations at the same time without being able to identify the exact location of the data at any given time? And then it basically goes into the answer, which says, if appropriate controls are in place, there are no limitations regarding the geographic location of cloud computing services. So again, they're acknowledging that many people would be using a cloud. So here's a quick poll question just to kind of get an idea of the people that are viewing this. Does anybody use a GMP application that is hosted in the cloud? And there's a screen up there if you could vote. I'll kind of reveal the results of those in a minute. I'm going to wait as we get some more votes in. Give it another minute. All right, it actually looks like the majority of the people listening said no. So I just want to take a chance to take a moment. You can feel free to either raise your hand or type something in. Let me know why your organization doesn't use GMP applications that are hosted in the cloud. If anybody wants to respond.
It looks like we have one comment here, Jenny. This person says that we're not on any cloud yet due to senior executive concerns with client intellectual property.
Okay, thank you for providing that.
It looks like we also have a hand raised. We're going to go ahead and unmute you, Alberto, and you're welcome to ask your question.
Thank you. It's not a question regarding the previous question. Is we prefer to keep our information in our premises normally.
Okay, and that's what a lot of people feel that way or have those guidelines from their corporate IT. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move along. Maybe give you some more information of if you're considering it or if you would like your organization to consider it, what things could you look for in a hosted GMP solution so that you can meet the data integrity requirements? So again, going back to Alcoa, what would you look for to help meet those? So attributable. You would want to look for a system that has security around individual logins, ability to tie into your Active Directory, again, to help make sure that you have the right people with the right access. Legible, is the audit trail easily readable for QA and FDA review? So that's a big thing. I know a lot of computerized systems have audit trails that aren't really human readable, or you need a plugin or something else to be able to use to be able to read the audit trail. So having something that's easily navigatable is really important. Contemporaneous. You would like to look for a system that has high availability because you want to make sure that it's always available whenever you're doing your GMP activities. Did you look for something with a reliable data center? Look for something with mirroring and redundancy to make sure that your uptime is really high. Original, can somebody enter data in offline? If so, how would it be entered into the system? Is there a mechanism to store scanned files into the system? So maybe you have a backup. Sometimes you need to do stuff on paper. Can it embed those documents, those PDFs, into the system? And then accurate. The security of the databases is really important. You'd want to look for something that has individual databases. You don't want to share a database with another company. Make sure it's not commingled. Look and see, have they done their due diligence at the company to make sure that it's not a system that can be easily hacked. And then again, making sure from a process standpoint that it's validatable. Can the workflows be validated so that you know that every single time your computerized system is performing the same way? Going back to the ER, enduring and retrievable. Evaluate the backup and restoration service. Is it something that you'd be able to go back to? Do they have geo-redundant storage for their backup? What happens at the end of life? How can you get your data back? Do they provide your data back, or do you have to jump through hoops and hurdles to get that data back? And does the host have a retention policy? When are they going to get rid of the data, the backups that you have? How long will they keep it for? So I wanted to provide some real examples of those things so that you have some really concrete things to look for if you wanted to use a cloud solution to help achieve data integrity. Our product is Blue Mountain Regulatory Asset Manager Cloud Essentials. And that's just one example of a software that you can use. It's a GMP asset management software. It was launched, Blue Mountain RAM was launched in 2007, so it's a very stable product. And it was launched for the cloud in 2016. It's designed specifically for the GMPs, and it is considered to be commercial off-the-shelf software. It's validated. There's pre-executed IQ, OQ, and PQ documentation that is provided within this package. So looking at some of the questions in that draft guidance, we'll go through, we're going to answer them, and then we're going to provide specific examples from our software. The first question is the FDA investigator allowed to look at my electronic records? And the answer is yes. All records required under CGMP are subject to FDA inspection. You must allow authorized inspection, review, and copying of a record, which includes copying of electronic data. And they reference 211.180C and 212.110A and B. And I just want to take a moment to point out that even though the guidance is in draft state and it's a guidance document, the FDA can cite you for data integrity violations because all of the whole guidance is basically referencing back to different parts of the 21 CFR. So this is all the findings would be referring to, for example, this one's at 211, 212. So here's an example. Looking for something that has convenient reporting purposes. So you don't necessarily want to take the time if an inspector is asking to see some records about, for example, your equipment. You don't want to log into the system and then they have an opportunity to really poke around and say, oh, can you click on that for me? So having convenient reports like those shown on the right side of the screen provides a really easy way to get the data that the auditors are looking for in a consistent format that can be printed and hand delivered to them. So going into Cloud Essentials, you again want to have a system that's available so that you can grab these records at any point in time. We use Microsoft Azure as our host, and we take advantage of their uptime guarantees, the geo-redundancy for the backups. Again, somebody that's managing backups and restoration for you, a full disaster recovery plan, meaning that the data center has different ways to ensure that your uptime is really high. Like I said, the always-on availability, and also that there's a single tenancy architecture. You don't want your data to be commingled. And then you want to make sure that you have a data center that meets the industry compliance standard. For example, SOC 1, SOC 2, and the ISO 27001. The next question is in regards to audit trails. So what is an audit trail? How often should audit trails be reviewed? And who should review the audit trails? And I go on to say that an audit trail means a secure computer-generated time-stamped electronic record that allows for reconstruction of the course of events relating to the creation, modification, or deletion of an electronic record. An audit trail is a chronology of the who, what, when, and why of a record. FDA recommends that audit trails that capture changes to critical data be reviewed with each record and before final approval of the record. So again, this is an example of the audit trail in Blue Mountain Regulatory Asset Manager. And you can see on the left-hand side, every single time edits happen or the status changes, the record moves from draft to approved or whatnot, those are all marked in there. And if you hit the plus sign, it would show you the differences and what changed. And then also the record identification section on the right shows you who did it, what the audit reason was, and what the date and time stamp was for that activity. There's different views that allow you to compare two different versions or change dates and times together, and makes it really easy to view the audit trail so that when your quality person does need to review that information, they can do so fairly quickly. And again, here's that example of how easy it is and what to look for in an audit trail. The differences are highlighted in yellow, so again, it makes it easy. You don't have to scroll through pages of information to find out what actually changed at that point. Really easy to see. And again, as I mentioned before, having the reporting capability built in to be able to print out the audit trail history report and have that right at your fingertips to provide to an auditor. The next question is in regards to personnel and access. And the question is, why is the FDA concerned with the use of shared login accounts for computer system. That's kind of obvious. You want to make sure it's attributable, but their answer is you must exercise appropriate controls to assure that only authorized personnel may use to computerize MPCRs or other records or input laboratory data into computerized records. And you must implement documentation controls that ensure actions are attributable to a specific individual. Then they go on to say, how should access to GMP systems be restricted? You must exercise appropriate controls to assure that the changes to computerized MPCRs or other records or input of laboratory data can be made only by authorized personnel. The FDA recommends that you restrict the ability to alter specifications, process parameters, or manufacturing or testing methods by technical means where possible, for example, by limiting permissions to change settings or data. So again, this goes back to what I mentioned previously about having an administrator have separate rights in a system than an end user. So looking for a system that has the ability to segregate the different types of users. Maybe they're a supervisor. This person is a supervisor, so they would only have the ability to do supervisor type activities. Again, having the required settings for the electronic signature, that's something that you want to make sure that you're capturing so that you know who did what. Again, the personnel ID, so not only that, but it also has the display name to really ensure that all of your activities are attributable to that person that you've given rights to in the system.
We do have a question here, Jenny. The question is, how does the information get into the cloud, as a document or as a form or combination?
So there's a number of different ways for the information to get into the cloud. For us, it's dependent on what the customer needs are. Maybe they're a new company and they don't have existing data, or they have minimal existing data, so we'll give them basically a blank slate that's configured, and they start entering in their different equipment, and they set up, this is the workflows that we're going to use, and this is how frequently we want the work activities to be performed. So that's one way. And another way is if there is existing data, it can be migrated into the system as is, so that you don't have to key in maybe 30,000 assets or events or whatnot. Does that answer your question? Excellent. So the next topic is that they talk about is workflows and validation. And the question is, does each workflow on our computer system need to be validated? The answer is yes. A workflow is an intended use of a computerized system to be checked through validation. What they're talking about that they don't write there is typically known as PQ. If you validate the computer system but you do not validate it for its intended use, you cannot know if your workflow runs correctly. The FDA recommends you implement appropriate controls to manage risks associated with each element of the system. Controls that are appropriately designed to validate a system for its intended use address software, hardware, personnel, and documentation. So an example of that, this is an excerpt, this is just a piece of paper, but this demonstrates, it's one of the documents that we provide for you or create for you in Cloud Essentials. Since it's commercial off the shelf and everything's pre-configured, this is delivered to you, and it maps out each of the workflows so that you can see what's happening at each step, and then you can validate against that, which we've already done, to ensure that it's going to happen every single time. So you'd want to look for a system that has something similar to map out the workflows. And again, this is going into the configuration part of our system, which allows you to really get into what the configuration should look at, so that you can map it and test it, again, in the style of a PQ, so that it meets your intended use. Who's going to sign what record at what time? When does it get closed? What happens when it's closed? And these are just different screens from the configuration side of our system. Now, if anybody has any questions, I just want to remind you, you can either raise your hand or type it in the chat window. But just to summarize, the presentation from today, data integrity compliance can be achieved in the cloud. But you want to carefully consider your vendor and leverage their resources to validate and maintain the system. They are the experts in their software. You want to think about true cost. So there's a cost if you purchase something and you install it in your system. The hardware, the validation, the project implementation, backup and restoration services and activities, applying updates to both the software and the servers that you have. So think about that if you're just looking at cost of on-premise versus in the cloud. And compare it to your current system. Can you reduce the risk of getting a data integrity violation by improving the system you use and using it in the cloud? And also remember that implementation can be easy. With commercial off-the-shelf software products, a lot of the work is already done, and the companies are typically experts in making that process very easy for you. And again, there is a certificate link in the GoToWebinar chat window if you'd like a certificate to keep in your training files. An example of what it looks like.
Yeah, and again, as Ginny said, feel free to submit your questions via the questions panel, or we always encourage you to raise your hand and ask it over the phone line here. It looks like we already have a bunch of questions here, and let me start at the top, Ginny. The first question is, will this presentation be sent out? And I'll answer that one, absolutely. If you send us an email, if you email marketing@coolblue.com, we'd be happy to send you a copy of today's presentation. The next question here is, how much wraparound testing should we do for a cloud-based app, or can we hang our hat on the vendor test materials?
So that's a great question. So it is an FDA requirement to vet your vendors, and really it's based on a risk assessment that you would do. A lot of our customers choose to audit us and find out if we have processes that really meet the needs of what they would do and what the FDA would expect, and if they found that everything meets their needs, then they go ahead and write a document that says, the vendor's practices are in alignment with our expectations, therefore we're going to leverage their validation documentation. So we have a lot of our customers that do that.
Okay, the next question here, the question is a shared account on the OS, the operating system, allowed if the individual is logging into the application?
So to log onto the computer, that is completely independent, at least for our software product. Every time you would log into VMware, for example, even if you're in the cloud or on-premise, even if you're logged into your computer, you're still required to log into the system, and you need to have that individual username and password to log in.
We have another question here. When using Azure and a public IP connection, does this make the system an open system as per Part 11 definition?
So we've done an assessment on open versus closed systems, and we've determined that our system is indeed a closed system, and that's something that I can provide you with more information if you send it in an email. I'd be happy to send that assessment information.
Okay, a couple more here. The next question says, in regards to Alcoa, is there a regulatory requirement that requires data to be signed as it is taken, or does it simply need to be stated when the data was obtained and by whom?
So the data needs to be entered at the time that you record it. That's what contemporaneous means. So I'm not quite sure if that answers your question. You can't, if you go back and said, I took this at 9 o'clock this morning, that would theoretically, if you're writing a date and time stamp, that would be backdating. So it needs to be done when the activity is happening.
Yeah, that's good. And if you want to chime in on that question, the person that asked it and clarify, we're happy to entertain that or answer it further. We have a couple more questions here, Jenny. Let me see, I'm trying to sort through them. We have some similar questions about using shared accounts. Here's a question. How often would you recommend for us review the audit trails of each application, and what do you look for?
That really is, in a general sense, that's up to the risk of what you're reviewing. So if you're talking about maybe an electronic batch record, it would be that you would review the audit trails when the QA would be required to typically approve at 100% a paper batch record, so upon release or signature of that batch record. But it's up to the risk. So maybe, for example, our system is a asset management system. Maybe you have a procedure that says QA will review it on a monthly basis, the audit trails or whatnot. But having that risk assessment is what the FDA is really looking for, to say this is how often QA is going to review this system and the audit trails, and here's why we've decided that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, we're happy to answer questions, and hang on here. So if you want to submit them to the questions panel, feel free to do that, or you can also raise your hand and ask your question over the phone. Another question here, Jenny, asked about if the reporting can be customized within a cloud-based application.
For our application, yes, obviously there's some limits. We would have to vet the request of the individual customer, but that is something that you would want to look for if you were going with a hosted system, that the reporting would meet the needs of your organization.
Another question, do you have a data integrity checklist for the cloud?
One of the documents we provide is a mapping against 21 CFR Part 11, and that's something that, again, is in that packet, and I think that might meet the needs of what you're looking for.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any more questions for today's webinar. Again, feel free to contact us. We're happy to carry on the conversation regarding data integrity, especially in the cloud, if you do have further questions after the webinar. But I do want to thank all of our attendees who were able to join us today. It's really valuable to us that you came to listen to us, and we hope that there was valuable content in the webinar, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Again, I think in the chat window we've posted an email address that you can just send us a message if you'd like a copy of the presentation, or if you have any further questions, we can kind of field that and help answer those for you. Again, thank you everyone who attended today, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Thanks.